session. So we'll be looking into the topic, understanding business metrics. And our speaker is Mr. Bolaji Olatunde. Hope we have our notepads and pen ready to document our learnings. React with your favorite emojis so I would know you are ready. All right, thank you. Super, I can see our reactions. Thank you. So, who are we at ID Analytics and what do we do? At ID Analytics, we empower individuals and organizations to harness the transformative power of data through tailored training and consulting, ensuring they thrive in today's analytics-driven landscape. As I mentioned earlier, the topic to be discussed is understanding business metrics, setting the battle between metrics and KPIs in reporting. And we have with us here Mr. Bolaji, who would help do justice to the topic. About our speaker, Mr. Bolaji Olatunde is a data and business intelligence analyst. He is a BI analyst, also a Power BI developer with 3+ years experience in finance, healthcare, and hospitality. He is an expert in Power BI, Excel, and SQL for data analysis and reporting. He is skilled at building interactive dashboards and data models for decision making. Mr. Bolaji is grounded in economics with strong skills in finance and data visualization. He is passionate about helping small business revamp their reporting and analytics system. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Bolaji Olatunde. Mr. Bolaji,
All right.
you are welcome, sir.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. Please confirm that you can hear me loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's good to be here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can I?
Yes, you can share your screen. I'll stop sharing now.
All right. Thank you. Okay, let's put on the screen and share. All right, just confirm that you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, sir.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you, and good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bolaji Olatunde, and I'll be taking a short session on the topic understanding business metrics, settling the battle. Maybe not settling the battle per se, but just trying to understand what's the difference between KPIs and metrics are. All right. So let me switch the slides here. So a little bit about me. I think I've already been introduced. I have a background in economics from the University of Lagos. If you're also from Unilag, you can drop it in the chat. I work primarily in business study and analytics. I've been doing that for a little over 3 years now, almost 4. I do training once in a while, and I'm also excited about the topic of analytics engineering. I've been diving into that more recently. Okay, so what is our agenda for this evening? We're going to look at the meaning of metrics and KPIs. I'm very sure these are not terms that are new to any one of us on the call. You've probably heard of metrics and KPIs before. We're also going to look at the PI and K of KPIs. I mean, basically, when you look at KPIs, the understanding of what KPIs are is actually embedded in the name itself. We're just going to deep dive a little bit into what they are. Then we look at the problem of measurement, which is very key when it comes to metrics. And then we'll talk a bit about the presentation of metrics and KPIs, and then we'll have a short Q&A. So a very brief agenda because we have very limited time. And so let's get right into it. So trying to see how I can monitor the chat at the same time. So let me see if I'm able to do this because I like to see what is happening in the chats as well. But anyway, since I'm guessing we have a couple of people from maybe different parts, so maybe you can drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Are you joining from Lagos, Nigeria? Are you joining from outside of Nigeria? Are you joining from Ibadan or Oyo, Ekiti, or Osun? Where are you joining from? Okay, I see Candice from Ibadan. Excellent. All right, Steve from Ibadan. From Lagos, seems like everybody is from Southwest. Interested. I'm originally from Ibadan, but I was speaking to you like from Lagos or the States, if you will. Okay, all right. Lagos. Okay, so all of us are in Nigeria. So which means that if I crack some jokes that are Nigerian, maybe we would relate. Okay, Jibril from Promotion Nigeria. Okay, Silva from Nairobi, Kenya. Excellent. Benigo from Delta State. Okay, wonderful. Okay, that's nice. Beautiful. Um, I think I am home, right? I'm home speaking to my people. Okay, so first things first, metric and KPI. Like I said, I'm sure this is not a new term. So just when you hear the word metric and hear the word KPI, can you just type in the chat what you understand by metric and KPI? What is a metric? What's a KPI? Do you think they're the same? Do you think it's different? Just type it in the chat. What do you understand by a metric? What do you understand by KPI? Are they the same or are they different? I'm looking in the chat. Pius, Jibril, Sylvia, Kende, Muhammad. Just type in the chat, anyone. What do you understand by a metric? What do you understand by KPI? Are they different? Are they the same? So this is, all of us here are either analysts already or aspiring analysts. So you've probably heard the word KPI. You don't have to be exact with your definition, just kind of what do you think? Okay, Mohammed says they're different. Juice says they're different. Okay, that's nice. Let's join. Okay. All right. So I'm so sorry. Okay, can you guys hear me? I hope everyone's still hearing me. Okay, sorry. Okay, excellent. All right. So, yeah, metrics and KPIs. Like I say, I've seen a few numbers in the charts. It's a few definitions maybe. Someone says that metrics are unit of measurement, excellent. And we've kind of all agreed that it's different, right? Now, this is how, or based on some research, this is what I will describe the difference between metrics, what the difference between metrics and KPIs are. And I like the definition from Silva. I said metrics is a unit of measure, and then KPIs are outcomes. Okay, that's a very interesting one. Unit of measure, and then KPIs are outcomes. Okay, so this is what I would define the metric as, and I think Silva is very, very correct. Oh, Candice says KPIs are typically broader, while metrics track specific processes. Okay, well, we would see if that is correct. So yeah, a metric is just a quantitative value used to measure or track the status of a specific business process or its representation of a measurement. Now, I've added business process here because we are talking about metric in the context of data, in the context of the business, in the context of analytics. So a metric is how you quantitatively measure something, right? But in the broader sense of it, right, you have metrics for different things, like your height is a metric, kilometers, all of those things are metrics. But in essence, metric is just a representation of some kind of measurement, just like Sylvia said. And then when you look at a KPI, like the definition says here, it's a little bit more specific than a metric. So this says that it's a critical quantifiable measures, or they are critical quantifiable measures that are strategically important to measure progress towards a desired goal. KPIs are used to improve performance using leading indicators that later drive desired impact indicated with lagging measures. That's a mouthful, but we're going to break it down bit by bit. So understand that a metric is just basically any value that measures something, right? Any kind of representation of measurement, it's a metric, typically quantitative. When we talk about a KPI, looking from this definition, there are a few points that we can highlight here. The first one is that a KPI is what? Is a quantifiable measure. So which means a KPI is a metric, but a metric may not necessarily be a KPI, right? So KPI is a metric may necessarily be a KPI. Now, it's a quantifiable measure, one. Two, it is strategic. Now, strategic means that it's not just a random number. It's tied to something. It's important because of something. And that's why the definition also says strategically important to measure, again, metric, progress towards a desired goal, right? It's of course it's a measure, then it's important because it's driving some kind of strategy or in itself is part of a strategy to achieve a desired goal. Now, a metric on its own doesn't necessarily need to achieve a desired goal. It's just some kind of measurement. And when you call that metric a KPI, it's a KPI because you're trying to measure something, because you're trying to attain a particular goal or a business objective, right? So that is one key difference between a KPI and a metric. A KPI is much more specific towards how do we measure how we're performing at and against a goal. Why the metric is just random. It's just not just random, but it's just measuring something. And then the second part of the definition says that KPIs are used to improve performance by using something we call leading indicators, right? That would then drive desired impacts indicated by lagging measures. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by leading indicators and by lagging measures. But one thing I want you to understand first is that a KPI is a much more specific, quantifiable measure that you are using to track the attainment of a desired goal, a desired outcome, or a desired measure. So that is just what the KPI, what the difference between a metric and a KPI is. Now let's just dive into the three letters itself, right? Remember I said the PI and K of the word KPI because the understanding of KPI is kind of embedded in the definition of KPI in itself. So the first one, P, performance. Remember what is performance, right? If you think about performance just as a word in its own, or to even to your own specific life, right, or your day to day, the performance is like just like a display. If you go to maybe an art to say performance, if it's a music concert, that's a performance, right? When someone is carrying out an activity, it's basically a performance, right? But in the context of business, a performance is the progress of a business process, right? So think of the business you're selling. Sales is how the sales is progressing. It's kind of the performance. Any kind of operation, the operation of the business is a performance. The execution of the project, right, is a performance. So in the word KPI, the performance just basically means that there is some kind of process that you're trying to understand, right? That you're trying to measure, that you're trying to improve, right? That is the first part of understanding what makes up a KPI, right? It's tied to a business process. It's not just a number that exists within the company. It's tied to a business process. Now, the second word, which is the indicator, right? Now, the word indicator is not new, right? It's not something that we're not familiar with, but it's probably a word that, or maybe it's a measurement that people don't think deeply about. Because when something is an indicator, right, it means that you're trying to see how a process is performing and how an activity is performing, or you need something to kind of measure how that how that process is performing, right? So an indicator is a measurement of the status of a business activity or operation, and this is what is actually a metric, right? It is what is actually a metric. Now, let's look at an example, right? If you have the goal of, let's say, your goal is to keep fit, right? That is your goal. Your goal is to keep fit. I want to keep fit. By the end of the year, I want to be fit. What does it mean to be fit? Oh, okay. I'm supposed to be at a certain weight. I'm supposed to be at a certain body mass index. I'm supposed to have had or consumed a certain amount of calories, right? Those are different indicators of your fitness, right? The same thing in business. Oh, our goal for the year is to, I don't know, achieve a certain level of profit. Now, achieving that level of profit is probably a function of some other activities that is going to be done. You're going to sell, you're going to advertise, how you're going to measure each of those components, right? Of achieving that level of profit is also an indicator, even though, yes, the profit in itself is also another kind of indicator. And that is where the concept of leading and lagging indicators come to play. Now, let me use the example of the, like, you try to keep fit, right? You're trying to keep fit, and one of your objectives with trying to keep fit is you want to achieve a certain weight, right? Oh, by the end of the year or by the end of the month, I want to be 70 kg, right? That 70 kg, right, is a lagging metric. It's a lagging is because until you have done certain things that increases your weight size, then you now know what your weight is, right? Remember, the goal is not to actually increase weight, the goal is to be fit. So that indicator of how you're fit is your weight, but you can't know your weight until you measure your weight, right? So your the weight is a lagging metric, it's a lagging indicator. But a leading indicator, right, is something that you use to measure what will impact that weight. So for example, how do you increase weight when you need to consume certain amount of calories, right? Then you're measuring how much calories you're consuming every day, right? This measurement of the calories is an indicator of what you're consuming, but then that would help you understand if you're actually going to meet your weight, right? So that is what we mean by leading and lagging indicator. The same thing in business. If the goal in a business setting, for example, is to say that, oh, we want to achieve 2 million in sales by the end of Q4. Hmm. Okay, year-to-date sales want to achieve 2 million, could be $2 million, 2 million CDs, 2 million pounds, 2 million whatever currency. That's what we want to achieve by the end of the year. That is a what? It's probably a lagging metric, right? Depending on what else you're comparing as the overall objective of the business. That's a lagging metric because you would not know how much sales you've made until you actually make the sale, right? You keep measuring how much sales you're making at the end of each month or each week or each quarter and say, are we actually close to the 2 million target? But then what is going to drive the achievement of that sale? Oh, we're going to start making a lot of customer calls. We're going to be in a lot of advertisement. All of those things, right? They in themselves are some kind of KPI, right? Or some kind of indicator to understand if we're actually tracking towards the actual goal, right? So again, indicators are just measurements of a business process, and they can be either leading or lagging. Leading in the sense that they're measuring the performance that has already happened. I'm sorry, lagging, that's lagging, and then leading would be that you're using that to see if you're going to actually attain your lagging indicator. Okay, that's an indicator. That's the difference. And then the first one, the last part of it is key. I've added this as the last part because it is a very it's not in itself that important. But what basically key just means is that if there is a process that you're trying to monitor, there's a goal that you're trying to achieve as a business or as a company, there will be more than one way to track how we are performing in order to achieve that. Now, in the sense of an indicator like sales or profits, that is the way, right? That is how that indicator is going to be measured, right? That is how that metric is going to be measured. It's just your sales, you measure your sales, how much sales, how much profit, done. But in some other instances where there is a broader business objective, right, that the company as a whole is trying to achieve, or maybe it's just your team, or maybe it's just your department that you're trying to achieve as a whole, then they're most likely going to be more than one way for how the indicators or the metrics can be measured, but there will be one that will be closely relevant to how you're defining that objective. Now, I'm going to use an example that I'm hoping everybody is familiar with, and which is inflation. Okay, let's look at inflation because that's the number we see every day in the we hear the word inflation every time. At least if you are in this, if you are in West Africa, you definitely know what inflation is. Now, what is inflation? Right? Inflation is. Does anybody want to try? I'm guessing you don't need to be economics experts, right? To know what inflation is. But in the interest of time, what is inflation? We say that inflation is the consistent increase in the prices, right, of all goods and services in the economy over a certain period of time, right? It's increase in price. Thank you, Kendi. That is what inflation is. Now, yes, that is the increase in price. But how do you measure inflation? Or right now, if anybody knows, just type it in the chat. Maybe there's going to be a prize for the person. How does the National Bureau of Statistics right now in Nigeria measure inflation? Anybody wants to try? Just next 10 seconds. How they measure inflation, or what are the different ways in which inflation is measured, if it can be measured in different ways? Or right now, when the NBS, National Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria, or maybe in your country, which may come, how do they measure inflation? Anybody wants to try? I'm looking in the chats for the first response in the next 10 more seconds to go. How do you measure inflation? We're talking about KPIs, we're talking about metrics, and we're all business people here. So, okay, price of goods, excellent, driven through the high spike of price on goods. Okay, interesting. Now, you would all agree with me that there is this number that the NBS publishes called the inflation rate, right? Which in Nigeria is about 22 point something percent right now, I think, right? So there's a major publishes number called inflation. What really is the inflation rate? What is the NBS calculating with that number, right? Why don't they just say, oh, if you want to find inflation, we'll go to the market, we'll take all the prices. How much is this? How much is this? How much is this? How much is this? What was it at this time? Has it increased? Oh, it has increased, then we have inflation. No, right? That's not what inflation is about. So what is the inflation rate? Inflation rate is trying to measure, oh, we know that prices will increase, but they're increasing very fast. If they're increasing very fast, that then there's a problem, right? Prices will never stay the same. They will increase, but if it's increasing so fast, that's when it becomes a problem. That's what inflation is. But then when you think about, I'm speaking like this because we are data people, right? When you think about the word inflation, just think, price was 30 naira yesterday or $30 yesterday, and now it's $50. So there's inflation. Is there inflation? No, price will increase. But if it's increasing continuously and it's too fast, then that's when you have the problem of inflation. So the inflation rate is saying, oh, what did we have? What were the prices? So when they say price, right? Price in the sense that they try to take some goods are representative of all the items in Nigeria, representative, right? They create something called an index, CPI, Consumer Price Index, and then you measure You track what was the consumer price index last year, what's the consumer price index this year, what's the percentage growth, right? And that's your inflation rate. So the inflation happens when that rate is increasing every time. So if price grew by 10% now and then it grew by 12% next year, and the rate just keeps increasing, then we have a problem of inflation. The price change and its own is not inflation. So what am I trying to say? Just as everyone here has described, everyone said inflation is the increase in price. Just direct increase in price could have been one way of measuring inflation, or the price index that I talked about could have also been one measure of measuring inflation. But depending on what, in this case, the actual true meaning of inflation, right, from an economic standpoint, that determines how the NBS then decided to measure inflation. Okay, you also have that kind of scenario in business, right? One example that I would give is, let's say you're doing ads, you're doing marketing, and you're not saying, oh, I want to see how my marketing campaign is performing, right? I want to see how my marketing campaign is performing. Now, what is marketing? What is campaign performance? When I mean campaign, like, oh, right, I do some ads, I send some mass emails to people. Did they buy? Did they sell? Did they get to them? And how do I measure the impact of that email marketing, for example? Am I going to measure it by, oh, how many people opened the email? Am I going to measure it by how many people clicked on a link that went to my website to buy something? Am I going to measure it by how many people clicked on the link, went to the website, and actually bought something because they went through the email, right? Campaign performance in that sense is going to be measured in a couple of ways, right? But for the team that is in charge of the business, there will be one way, right, that is most closely to what they want to track as campaign performance. Okay, so a KPI in itself is a metric, right, that is measuring the status of a specific business process, but it is also key because it is the close measure of that process that a business can take and make some decision on it. It's not just any number. There are lots of numbers that you can compute within a business, but it's not everything that is going to be important, right, for a business to take decisions. So those few metrics that measure the progress of a business activity or process, right, that is your KPI. All right. Hope I haven't caused any confusion yet. That is your KPI. Now that we understand what a KPI is, let's go to, and there are different kinds of KPIs, which I'm going to dive into now. Different kinds of KPIs just come from the fact of what specific aspect of the business are you measuring? Are you measuring input into a production process? Are you measuring operations? Are you measuring strategy? Are you measuring outcomes? Are you measuring the result? Are you measuring an intervention? Different kind of KPIs depending on what aspect of the business that you're measuring. So we're not going to go into that. But for we as data people, we typically come from the perspective of the computation of that KPI, right? And in some instances, in alignment with the core business objective. So let's look at that measurement. Okay, let's look at that measurement. What typically is the challenge when it comes to KPIs, right? I've alluded to it based on my explanation of the inflation, which is that there's always going to be a couple of measures, right, to track that performance, right? There'll be more than one way to measure that performance, but there will be one key way to do it, okay? The second problem, right, or the importance, rather, of this measurement is this quote that I saw when I was preparing for this presentation that says, what gets measured gets done, right? What gets measured gets done. I mean, back in school, right, if you say you want to improve your academic performance and you're not monitoring the grades that you get at the end of every semester or at the end of every course that you take, you won't even know if your grade is actually improving as you wanted it to be or if it's actually decreasing, right? So you can't improve what you can't measure. You can't report on what you can't measure. Okay? If you don't measure it, you can't track it. And if you don't track it, or if you don't track it, you can't report on it and you can't improve it. Okay. Now, This is important because for a lot of us, especially in our businesses, there are some let's call them standard numbers like profit, sales, revenue, maybe I don't know, customer reach, just kind of thing. There are a couple of things like that that we all are kind of familiar every day with. But then there are some things that maybe after some kind of management meeting, they then come and they want to say, oh, let me give us one example is oh you want to track, let's say you're in a bank, for example, or any kind of business really, right? You have something called SLE, your service level agreement. How do you agree to do certain things? Or maybe when you have an external request, the idea is that you must respond to that request within 24 hours. If a customer reaches out, if a client reaches out for a problem, we want to make sure that within 24 hours, or maybe within 12 hours, we must respond to that customer. Now, if that business, right, doesn't have a way to measure how long it takes between when the request comes in and when one of the reps or any member of the company responds to that request, there is no way they can say that we are actually improving on our compliance to this service level agreement. Okay. Now that is important for us because as data people, typically sometimes where it starts with us is oh, they give you some stories that have been discussed in the management, and then they say, oh, we have this objective to do this, to do that, to do this, to do that, to do this, to do that. And one, you might have the data, which is good, or you might have the data, but only to like a certain point. You're not able to actually calculate this metric. Or even sometimes, right, you understand what it is that the business um, wants to measure, wants to improve, but you don't even know how to measure it, right? One example that I've heard of a lot is, when you talk about productivity, right? It's a very common example in the business, right? How do you measure productivity? What is productivity? Right? Oh, you are more productive every day. Well, within different business settings or even within different contexts, the object of productivity, the topic of productivity might be measured slightly differently, right? But if there's no way to measure that productivity, there's no way you can objectively, right, say that, oh, we become more productive every day. Yes, there might be a few maybe behavioral changes that you may not be able to quantify the measure, yes. But then if you want to objectively say, oh, we're actually improving every day, or if someone makes the statement and say, oh, we are becoming more productive every day, okay, how? Show me. Oh, we have the numbers that measure X, Y, Z, da, 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 and that is why we can say that we're more productive, right? It said in God we trust, every other person must bring data, right? So it's very important that you're able to measure a KPI, or if there is an objective that the business is trying to improve, you need to sit down and figure out one, how does the business, how do you want to measure, this KPI, and would it properly reflect, right, what the business is trying to improve, right? Because depending on the objective, there might be more than one way to improve or to measure attaining that objective, but there may only be a few that will be closely tied, okay, to that objective. Okay, and this is where the knowledge of understanding business, understanding statistics, right, comes comes into play. Okay, this is where it really comes into play. So I've talked about productivity, and now one can be adoption. You're trying to say, oh, we're preparing dashboards every day, every day, every day, every day, every day for a data team, right? That you're always providing supporting the business with metrics like this. How do you even know whether the dashboards that you are creating are being adopted? What is adoption? How do you measure it? Right? So measurement is usually very, very key, and also key from the point of, well, how do you go back to the data and understand how this old data that was captured by a data engineer, a database, how does it all link together? If I say I want to calculate this, where do I need to go to calculate it? All of these are all part of the problem of measurement. But the key message simply remains that yes, you can have a KPI, right, or an objective, but if you can't measure it, you can't track it, you can't report on it. and you cannot improve it, right? So finally, we understand the KPIs, right? We understand why it's important. We understand that it must tie to a business process. How then do we present these KPIs? So we'll not be able to go into a demo to kind of see how to do things, maybe in Excel or in Power BI, but what are some key things that I would say that you should have in the back of your mind when it comes to the presentation of KPIs? Is one, like I said, understand how the KPI is measured, right? Understand how the KPI is measured. For some for some numbers, like revenues is clear, but think of something like the index that I talked about. So if you're working in a different field, right, and they say, oh, there's this number, or there's this metric I want to try and report on, understand how that number is measured, because when you understand how it's measured, you will be able to evaluate what are the proper ways, okay, for that KPI to be presented, right? Take example, the inflation rate. If you don't understand that inflation rate is percentages, you might present it in a different way, right? If you don't understand that the number has been approximated to the nearest millions, right? You may not present it in the right way. So understand how the KPI that you're trying to present on is measured. Two, have a reference or baseline for the KPI, right? Now, the goal is to improve sales. Okay, how do we know that sales is improving? How do we know that we are growing? Oh, when we are hitting a specific target of 2 million, that's our reference. Oh, when we are 20% above what we did last year, right? Or when we are at a certain percentage above the average that we've done over the last 5 years, right? A KPI is not different from a metric if you don't have a reference point that tells me that this KPI compared to this reference point has improved by this, and therefore we can say that yes, the performance that we're trying to measure has improved. So have a reference, well, a baseline. In typical business settings, it can be either your previous year, your budgets, your target, your forecast, your moving averages. Maybe it's a comparison to a basket or to a competition. You must have a reference that you're comparing these numbers to properly see if there's actually been an improvement or a decline in the metric. Thirdly, know how the KPI relates to different business entities, right? Why this is important is that, for example, right, if you look on the right-hand side here, this is a snapshot from some sample KPI cards in Power BI designed by this excellent Power BI developer, Gustav, which you can find him on LinkedIn. You can follow him, always posting different interesting ways to present data using Power BI. Very, very, very dynamic ways. Now, in one of the cards that you can see a gross margin or direct costs, right? Now, imagine you are trying to decrease costs, right? Cost is the KPI that you're trying to measure. Now, costs will not be generated in some sense by all departments equally, right? Costs will not be generated in some sense by all departments equally. So which means that if you are trying to say, oh, we want to see where we can cut costs, you have to take that cost and break it down by the entities that are actually relevant, right, in the generation of these costs. Okay, same thing with your margin. Your margin is your profitability, right? I won't take my gross margin, for example, and maybe say, oh, I'm going to measure my gross margin against my sales reps, right? Which of my sales rep is the most profitable? Yes, in some cases, it might make sense, but a sales rep may not be able to directly impact gross margin, but it can impact sales, it can impact revenue, right? So it might make more sense to track or to look at revenues from the perspective of what each sales rep is contributing than it is to look at maybe something like costs or margins, right? Some costs, yes, but margin, for example, might be a bit difficult to say, oh, which of my sales rep is most profitable? Not really. But again, you will need to know what the KPI is and then properly understand how it relates to different business entities. And then the final thing is to pick the right visual to aid the business decision, right? Pick the right visual to aid the business decision. This will go into an entire topic on visualization best practices, which is not the focus of this call. When you pick the right visual to aid the business decision, see this snapshot that I have here with the cards, right? If I ever see you just want to walk in and see how much you're making, how much are we tracking to what we've said last year or this year, it's clear, it's there. You can see the progress, you can see where we're lagging, you can see what KPIs are not tracking the way we expect. That might be the right KPI for the process, for the decision, for the audience that is looking at it. Another example might be, something like this where you're trying to see, well, we've said that we're going to always hit a certain target every month. Yes, in the overall, it seems like we hit the target, right? But we're trying to see which months we didn't perform as we should. Then you might say, oh, I'm going to use a chart like this where instead of comparing the actual value of revenue this year and revenue last year as two different lines or two different bars, I actually just visualize the difference to see, oh, this is the months that we dipped. And I can say, oh, from this month that we dipped, oh, probably it was because we bought a new equipment, we did this, we did that. That is why um, the KPI is down, blah, 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 blah. But depending on the visual that you choose and what is they're trying to convey and the decision that you need to make, right? That's the sync of all of those components to make it easy, right? To make a decision based off the KPI that we are showing. This is another example as well, where this is, I mean, we all know, most of us here probably know how to create like cards, right? KPI cards with Power BI or in Excel. But this is another way to say, oh, yes, we might show you that we made, a certain number, maybe the number of followers, the number of impressions. This is in the context of social media posts now. But well, is it good? Yes. So compared to, like, so when I talk about the reference point, in this case, it's not compared to like a last year or a last month, it's compared to the last 180 days, right? And this reference point is probably relevant because it's a social media context, right? That baseline will be dependent on the business or the context of the number that you're reporting in. But in addition to that, you can see that we have like a small chart that can tell you, oh, even if we've made, you know, certain number of we've achieved a certain number of impressions or engagements. When you look at the chart, you can see if it's actually tracking upward or tracking downward. Why this number might seem good compared to the last 180 days. Looking at the trend, it seems that oh, there were some months that we actually did not perform as much as we're doing, or we perform more, right? So the presentation of KPIs, these are some key points that I think that you need to consider so that what you're presenting ties closely to the business decision that you're trying to influence. So I think we have just about 15 minutes left, and I will just dive straight into Q&A. I expect that you have some questions, but then how can you improve your presentation of KPIs, right? These are a couple of books that I always try to recommend. I've read some of them, I've picked up some of them as recommendations from other experts in the field. Anyone that you can lay your hands on, I think it will be worthwhile. It helps you, it puts perspective into where data comes from, how data is captured, the meaning and the truth behind data, and how to properly represent and given different contexts, given different scenarios and all of that, being the strengths and weaknesses to different kinds of ways. So you can lay hands on any one of them, and I'm sure it will be a good addition to your portfolio of material. So that brings us to the Q&A. I'd like to leave a couple of minutes for anyone that may have some questions and maybe some discussions that we can talk about. All right, over to you. Okay, I can see one question in the chat. Can we get a soft copy of the books? I think I have some. I will try to make that available, but I'm sure you can find them online or maybe purchase them on Amazon or something. Well, I have one or two of them that I might be able to share. So I will reach out to the organizers and see how we can get that across. Okay. Any other question? Any questions? Any questions? I don't have any more discussions to talk about. The next best thing would have been a demo, but we don't have enough time for a demo. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? All right. I think there are no questions. Over to you. Okay. Is KPI used in engineering field, not necessarily production? Okay, interesting question. Will there be a KPI in an engineering field? Of course, there will be a KPI in an engineering field, right? Now, what will that KPI be is going to depend on what the engineering firm is doing, right? It depends on what the engineering firm is doing. I mean, one production is one, yes. Maybe the construction of houses might be another one that they're trying to measure, right? Maybe, for example, as an engineering firm, I might want to say that I would like to, have certain kinds of contract before the end of the year, right? That can be one. Or it could also be, I mean, a lot of these in the engineering might be production related because that's what engineering is. But as long as there is a process, right, there is some business activity that exists within the engineering field, then definitely there is a metric and there will probably be a KPI that ties to a decision that somebody key in that organization needs to make. I can't think of any examples at the top of my head because I'm not an engineering person, but yes, definitely there are KPIs used in engineering. Any other questions? Looking in the chat. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions. So, hosts, over to you.
Wow, I learned so much from this session. I know many of us don't know the meaning of KPIs before now, but now we all know that KPI means key performance indicator. So thank you so much, Mr. Bolaji, for the wonderful session. Really appreciate your presence. I hope we all learned a lot too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was nice
So you
to.
can check out our YouTube channel in the comment section for beneficial videos to assist in your data journey. You can also join our WhatsApp community where you get first-hand access to updates from us. Our LinkedIn link is also in the comment section. And it's a wrap on today's session. Thank you all for your presence. We would be expecting you at our next webinar. Till then, take care and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thank you. See you all. You can connect. Okay, I didn't say how you can connect with me, but I'm sure you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you, everyone, and see you another time. Bye.